G'day guys, Stills20 here and welcome back to City Skylines Miami. The city is looking very much completed, but I assure you we have so much more work to do, and the majority of the work that I want to do over the next few episodes is expansion. So don't expect a huge amount of detail work. In fact, it is very much the opposite of the work that I do in this episode. There is zero detail and you will see so much jankiness and so much imperfections. That is sort of the point of what I was trying to do, because this episode I really wanted to expand out the farmland and work on the outer ridges of the city, which is a project that I haven't really done too much of in my City Skylines work before, because generally when I work on the city and it gets to a certain point of expansion, it just gets a little bit too overwhelming and I usually just call it quits. Because, you know, as you expand out your city, there's just more work to do and it's much easier to just go like, okay, we're pretty much done here. But I don't want to do that for this series. I'm really keen to finish it. I want the city to look completed. So that's what today's episode is about. It's about creating a backdrop for the city and getting us ready for the Everglades, which will be in the next episode. I thought I was going to get to it in this one, but it turns out even putting in the minimal amounts of detail that I do in this build, it still takes a very long time to expand out these areas. So it might not look like a huge amount of work that I do because the detail is so light, but expanding out an area so large like this and thinking about how things are expanding out in a realistic fashion, this build did take quite a long time to complete. And one big factor was because I am zoning, I have to wait for all the buildings to spawn and grow rather than placing them down. I do place down some buildings, but I'm mostly just trying to zone out because I figured that would be the quickest way to expand. Turns out when you get your city to a size like mine, we're on 54,000 at the moment, but it's pretty big and there's a lot going on. And when you get to a size this big, an average week, rather than taking, you know, something like, I think usually it would take 2 seconds or something to roll through. My week was going at about 20 seconds, which means that buildings were growing in slow motion and I couldn't speed up the simulation at all. I tried uninstalling some mods, I tried a bunch of tutorials on the internet. So there was one where you basically uninstall everything, start a new save game with vanilla assets and then save it and then load all your games. I don't know, it's just, I tried so many different ways, but I could not get a simulation speed going any faster. I just think it's something it's just a limitation of the game, I think. Once you get to a certain size, don't expect your game to be running as smooth as it used to, even with vanilla assets like mine. So at the end of the day, it would have been faster if I just plopped down the buildings. Like you see me do sometimes, I'll place down a couple of buildings, but yeah, it's not something I did for all the suburbs. I think it just would have taken far too much time. Instead, I just zoned a whole bunch of areas and then I walked away from the computer for like 5 hours and just waited for everything to grow, which is pretty crazy. So you will see the weeks just fly through quite a lot. And I know it looks like it's going pretty fast right now, but this is sped up by about 6 times. So yeah, it's very much at an absolute crawl. And there wasn't much I could do about it, unfortunately. But that's just one small portion of this episode. Like I said, this episode's all about expansion and growing out those areas, and I really just wanted to fill in the gaps and create a backdrop for the city. No detail at all, and that is what you see me do right now. This is just about as little effort as an airport as I'll ever do. What this is meant to be. This is meant to be an Air Force base or an Army base. This is something that I saw in Miami and something that people were recommending that I built. I'm sure when you recommended me building an Air Force base, you probably didn't expect me to do it like this. This is me spending about 5 minutes just placing down buildings and calling it a day and just seeing how much of an army vibe I can get by spending 5 minutes basically placing down buildings and dragging out a couple of roads and painting down a little bit of surface, and that's it. Yeah, so sorry, I know a lot of people wanted to see me build something army based, but that was not going to happen. It's something that is pretty hard with vanilla assets and something that I'm not hugely into, but I did want to get the feeling that there was an army base around here, or an air force base, or whatever the hell this is. I don't know what this is. So basically I just placed down a domestic airport, and then I just thought about placing down a little bit of industry, and I wanted it to be pretty exclusive, so only one road going in, which is that avenue that you can see. And then something that I wanted to do as well, I wanted it to look like there was some barracks around here, so I just placed down one style of house in that one area, and I thought that kind of looked like a barracks. And then I thought by doing some perimeters and like some little roads here and there, I sort of thought that would feel a little bit more like there was like a patrol around here, or this was a trail where people would run and exercise, or training facilities. It was really fun actually. It was like, I'm talking about doing this so quickly and it sounds like a chore, but it was actually really fun just going, okay, quickly build an army base, and then I had to try and figure out how that would look and try to do it in a really quick way. A couple of weeks ago I did do an episode where I had a timer on, and for this episode I was trying to do the same thing. I was like, okay, let's try and expand out, and let's try and do this really quickly so that we can see the city really start to take shape. And by the way, the end cinematics really show off how the place is starting to take shape, and it's really quite exciting. So look forward to the cinematics at the end. It really frames the rest of the city, and it just makes me a little bit more excited to expand out in other areas and see what other things that we can complete around here. Now I'm starting to work on some farms. So in particular, the inspiration that I'm trying to take for this build is an area in Miami that is down south, and it's getting closer to the ocean. There seems to be a lot more agriculture down here than in other parts, at least going north. I could be wrong, but just looking around here, it does look like there's a lot of farming going on, and they are encroaching onto the Everglades, which is a real shame. I would actually like to ask you guys, because I didn't know a huge amount about the Everglades before this project, and I still don't know a huge amount anyway. But if you guys are from Miami or Florida and just know a little bit about it, how protected are the Everglades? Like, are these areas where they're pretty protected and there's a fair amount of national park area, or are these places very much under threat? I'm pretty sure they're probably very much under threat, like most of these areas in the world. Unfortunately, it's the same in Australia. We have beautiful areas of bushland and national parks, but I don't know, for some reason there's still logging going on, there's still expansion, there's agriculture really messing up those places. So the Everglades just look so beautiful and they're so amazing, and I'm really excited to work on that project in the next one. So I would love to know, like, how protected are these areas, and what sort of things are going on around here, because it looks quite amazing, but there does look like a lot of expansion going into those areas, unfortunately. Speaking of expansion, something that I noticed in this area was that, you got all this farmland and you've got this agriculture, but then you can see where, a lot of development has started to happen, and you see these suburbs starting to pop up, a lot of these like planned communities, and where all the houses look exactly the same. At least from Google Earth, you can see how, all the roof and the shape of the houses are pretty much exactly the same. I'm sure that they've got like little slight tweaks when you're a little bit closer, but from afar it definitely looks like that. So I thought it'd be really cool to do that as well. So you can see me working on this little planned area here. I've just placed down the exact same house. I know it might look a little bit unusual, but from afar I think it does look kind of cool. It shows that there's a real difference in the styles of houses and neighborhoods around here, and that was something else that I really wanted to establish. You can see like across the canal over here, you've got some more like traditional styles of suburbs and neighborhoods, and then on the other side you've just got these houses that all look the same, these road layouts that are a little bit more wavy and curvy, and there's only certain roads going into these like neighborhoods, and I really like that about the layout of this, and it's something that I've always wanted to sort of work on. I've started doing a bit more of it in Marble Mountain as we're going into the outer skirts of some of those cities, but I just think it's really cool because you can see how the city expands and how the style of development changes too. So you've got like these more traditional styles of expanding out these neighborhoods, but then There seems to be this trend where the houses all start to look the same and, you know, they become a little bit more exclusive, or the houses, or the road layouts I should say, are a little bit more wavy and curvy. And I wanted to show how the city has expanded out that way in my version of Miami too. So that's why these houses all look the same. And again, we are going for such low detail. I think if I was to go more detail in these areas, I would make those trees less clustery, because there's not like a huge amount of like big clusters of trees around these properties, because they are more recent developers, or developments I should say, and they don't really have, you know, a lot of foliage around here. It's more just like they pretty much buy up these farmlands and then they, you know, bulldoze everything, and then they just build these neighborhoods. So there's not a huge amount of like existing nature around here, but you know, because we're trying to build so quickly and I'm trying to just filling as many gaps as possible, I am just like placing down as many trees just to fill in them. So I think if I was going to do this again with more detail, we'd be using more fences. There'd be more like lines of trees and palm trees and things like that. But you know, we're not really doing too much around here. And a lot of like water sources, and a lot of like pockets of these little lakes and stuff, these man-made ones. Like Miami seems to be like that. I guess all this area is swamp and marshland. That is pretty much what the Everglades is. And you know, because there's so much water around here, there's quite a lot of, you know, reservoirs and canals, and you know, these little lakes, these particularly these man-made lakes that I was trying to build. Again, like so low detail, guys. I cannot stress enough. This feels so sloppy. This feels so lazy, but I can't stress enough. I was intending it to look like this, and this still took just such a long time. Zoning, I tell you what, zoning is such a waste of time. I'm never going back to zoning. I thought I was gonna do zoning for my next series that I've been working on. And after this, I'm just like, nah, stuff it. We are not zoning. This just takes so long. It's easier to just place down buildings. Like, who would have thought it? But, you know, that's just where we're at this moment. I don't know. If you guys have any, like, if you've experienced this as well with the zoning just taking such a long time to expand and grow when you're at such a large population, like, hit me up, because I would really love to know if you got any fixes to that, because we still have more zoning to do in this series, and I don't want to place down every single building, but you know, I don't know what to do. We're going to be in a real we're going to be in a bit of trouble, I think, later on down the track when it comes to zoning up these whole areas. And you know, it's not so bad in other series of mine, but because this city is so big, like, it's massive now. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm now using 81 tiles. So we're very, very much expanded out of the regular tiles of the, you know, base game. And there's just so much to expand on. I guess the good thing is that we do have a lot of Everglades to build, and this is probably about as big as I'm gonna get around here. The other side of the city, I don't plan to do quite as much expansion, and yeah, I sort of plan to be placing down a couple more buildings, more working on those planned communities like I built just before. So we're doing something a little bit different now, and I wanted to continue the expansion of the agriculture and industry around these areas. So, you know, obviously industry would have started off in the main city of Miami, but then, you know, as the city starts to expand, they just push all that industry further out of the city, and it sits along, you know, these more outer skirt regions. So you can see I'm placing down a fair amount of just like random industrial buildings, and I thought I'd put a couple more bigger types of industry. So we didn't actually have a proper waste facility, so I thought I'd place one out here. I've got a bit of oil out here as well, and the way that I'm expanding out this farmland is I'm using the surface painter to basically paint down different areas, you know, making it look like there's farms, but obviously there's not. Although, because I'm placing down as well a lot of industrial buildings, they still sort of act as farms. Like, a lot of this is actual agriculture and farmland, even though a lot of the work that I'm doing is just purely for aesthetics rather than function. using some trees as well, just to you know, paint down a couple of lines, putting down a couple more buildings and houses and scattered bits of industry, and that's pretty much as much detail as I'm doing. There seems to be quite a lot of like pockets of like trees and foliage and stuff like that around these areas, particularly as we get further out of the city. There's just like more tree lines and more blocks that are just covered up by trees that are, I guess, just not built up yet. But I'm sure eventually some developer's gonna grab hold of them and turn them into something other than just blocks of trees. And you know, like I said before, I'm trying to make it look like the style of roads are really changing the further out of the city you get. Something really nice about this area in Miami is that there's just so much grid that I can justify a lot of just massively long roads, which is really, really nice. Because it just makes things so much easier. But then at the same time, I didn't want to just get totally grid heavy, and I wanted to make a little bit of variation too, and that's why we got some more curvy types of roads. You can see the suburbs slowly expanding out. We are just flying through the years. Although we're not really flying through the years, it's going so crawly, guys. It's such a slow process waiting for these suburbs to grow. It's an absolute pain. You can also see, I don't know if you saw, but earlier on in this episode, I created a district called Nuclear Power Plant, and that's where I plan to put the power plant, because there is a big power plant in Miami, and I really want to build it. So as you can probably tell, we do have a few more episodes left of this series. There's quite a lot of areas that I still want to develop up, and yeah, there's a lot of expansion that I'm pretty keen to do. So I sort of figured that, you know, if I was going to be really true to this project and trying to get the vibe of Miami, I really needed to get a couple more smaller towns on the outer ridges of these areas. So rather than just having just Miami, the city, and then expanding out into just, you know, the outskirts of the city, I thought, you know, if we're gonna have Everglades and, you know, Miami Beach and other areas of that area, I really needed to put a couple of extra towns. So that's what we've got here. We've got this town. I can't stress enough, there is just absolutely no detail in this. I just zoned it, placed down a couple of services and some big industrial areas, and that's about it. I didn't want to do too much around here, just wanted to keep it so simple. I was looking at some of these places that are down south of Miami. They're probably still technically Miami, or they're their own place. I don't know. I don't really know what these places are. I just noticed that there's other towns or other cities down here, and I figured if we're gonna build something like that down here, I did need to build another city outside of it. So that's what we got here, and because we're zoning, you're just gonna have to wait and watch that grow. It will be grown by the time the cinematics roll around, so you know, don't worry too much about that. You will see him expanded out, but you just gotta wait for those years to roll through, unfortunately. I did a couple more golf courses around here. Miami's massive on golf courses, so I just thought, you know, they're pretty easy, big expansions that I could do. And a lot of the work that I was doing, I was sort of thinking, all right, what's a big part that I can, like, what's something I can build that's big and will take up a lot of space and it's low detail? And, you know, a couple of the answers for that were, you know, some parks. So just placing out a couple of parks and keeping them super simple, just a couple of, you know, curvy paths and some more planned out trees and calling it a day. But yeah, the golf courses worked really well for expanding out those areas. Something that I forgot to talk about before, but I also wanted the look of the transition from a lot of these farmlands to now these developments. So you can see a lot of, you know, expansion of these more planned development of these suburbs, but then you can also see where they've, you know, started to build up some of these areas. And what I was trying to do was, you know, try to make it look like you can see where the houses are going to sit. So I'm just using, again, the surface painter to very roughly paint out a couple of different, you know, just a different type of rough surface. That's what I'm trying to say. It's so basic, guys, and it's like a little bit like it's a little bit of a miss, but you know, from afar it looks pretty decent, and it works. I think it works just fine. Trying a couple more techniques when it comes to creating some farms, so just dragging out a couple of rows of trees, and also putting down some more reservoirs of water, and trying to keep them, trying to make it feel like they're very much planned, and you know, they're not very natural looking, and I love that. I really love creating them. It's really hard though, because once you know, I don't know about you guys, but when you already build something in City Skylines, it's hard to want to build more of the same thing. So, you know, once I built one of these more recent developed suburbs, I didn't want to build another one, but I just knew I had to build so many more. So it was really, you know, once you build one, you're like, oh, I don't want to build another one. Do I have to? But you do, you have to. Which is like half the reason why this took so long, is because I was just, you know, once you finish one, you just go, oh, I don't want to do another one. And then you'd have to just man up and just pull out another one. And that's fine, because I think the end result's great. But geez, it did take a very long time to complete, and it was very tedious, very boring work. But yeah, it was one of those things where, you know, you build something and then you fly around for, you know, 5 minutes or something, admiring how it changed the city up. But the process was definitely not fun. But yeah, trying to make things a little bit different as well. So, you know, not going for the same houses, but, you know, trying to mix it up a bit. I'm really glad they changed the color of some of these rooftops too, because then it just adds that variation that you need. And again, it does look a little bit strange just placing down the same house over and over again. But I assure you, like, if you were to look on Google Earth and see these houses, they all look exactly the same. But then when you were to go down to Street View, they've got little variations that the architects do to the houses, so that, you know, people feel like they're living in slightly different houses. But from afar, man, they look very much the same. Now I'm trying to like build out a couple more of these houses in this area with more spacing, and, you know, have a bit more tree around here, a bit more trees around these places, and make it look like people are living on much larger blocks of land. So there's a real contrast between new developments where people are very close to each other, and then some of the people who have been living on these properties for a while, and the city hasn't expanded quite as much, and you can see how they're just sitting on like much larger blocks. And I love that. I really think it's quite interesting. It's a really nice contrast between the two. And now I'm starting to work on this one area that sits right next to the airport in Miami. And I don't know exactly what the purpose of this area is, again, because I'm not doing any research besides looking on Google Earth, but I knew that I wanted to get something like this in my version 2. So I don't know, maybe this is a pumping station, or, you know, maybe it's a reservoir for water. I don't know, it's something, but we're gonna build it. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to place down a bunch of industry, some more of the bigger blocks of industrial areas. And then for the water, you know, I really wanted it to look like this is man-made. I didn't want it to look like there were pockets of water that were, you know, natural, or, you know, nature had created it. Instead, you know, I want to try to keep these quite boxy and, you know, quite man-made. And I think that the style really turned out quite nice. I think what really made this place pop was this one ground color that I found. I forgot that I had this because I hadn't really had a purpose for it before, but this combination of this resource and also the surface painter really just made this whole area feel more swampy and more, I don't know, a bit more swampy. And I think when we do the Everglades next week, this is exactly the technique that I'm going to use, because it really feels like a swampland. And yeah, it just makes me super keen to expand out. I have started playing around with the Everglades, and you will see a little bit of that in the cinematics at the end, so look forward to that. But you can really start to see how things are going to start expanding out, and how much this area just frames the rest of the city. I'm just super glad that I did it like this, and I just think the low detail is totally justified when you see how much the city has changed just by framing the rest of the place. But guys, that is it for the episode. I do hope you've enjoyed it. You can let me know if you have by rating up the video. That always helps. It also helps to get more of my content. If you want to see more of these videos, then rating up the video puts my videos more into your recommendations feed. So I don't know if that's something you want, but that's just something you could do. I want to give a special shout out to some of my patrons like Sean, Lucky Panda, VLDC, Charlie Zane, Tommy Hines, and Paul Wright. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!